Katie Wilson and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addresses the UN General Assembly. China is backing Brazil's $125 billion Tropical Forests Forever Fund, a landmark plan to reward rainforest nations for conservation. And Kazakhstan deepens trade ties with $5.2 billion in US agreements. First this evening, the second day of the general debate at the UN General Assembly is underway. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky took to the stage following yesterday's comments by US President Donald Trump that Ukraine might return all of the territory lost since the start of the full-scale invasion. In his speech, Zelensky said there is no ceasefire in Ukraine due to Russia's refusal, adding that the madness continues because of the weakness of international institutions. He also spoke on the Russian drone incursion into Poland, as well as the Russian fighter jets' violation of Estonia's airspace.
As Russia's war against my country goes on, people are still dying every week. Yet there is no ceasefire because Russia refuses. Russia abducted thousands of Ukrainian children, and we have brought some of them back. And I thank everyone who's helped. But how long will it take to bring all of them home? Childhood slips away faster than adults are able to help.
Just to bring you some breaking news, the Kremlin has warned that Trump's idea that Ukraine can retake occupied territory is deeply mistaken. On Tuesday, in a potentially game-changing U-turn, President Trump pivoted from pressing Ukraine to surrender territory to suggesting it's able to win all of its land back. Trump called Russia's campaign aimless. But the Kremlin has responded, saying such an idea is deeply mistaken and further pushing back on Trump's comments, adding that its invasion of Ukraine was not an aimless war. It also added that the process of normalizing relations with Washington was moving much slower than it had hoped.
US President Donald Trump now believes Ukraine can reclaim all land lost to Russia with the help of the European Union and NATO support. He made the comment on Truth Social after meeting Zelensky at the United Nations General Assembly in New York City on Tuesday. He also called Russia's campaign aimless and described it as a paper tiger, saying Moscow's weakening economy made this the time for Kyiv to act. His remarks signal a dramatic reversal from his earlier calls for Kyiv to make concessions in order to end the war. In February, he clashed with Zelensky in a heated Oval Office exchange, telling the Ukrainian leader he didn't have the cards to win. And just last month, Trump gave Russian President Vladimir Putin a high-profile welcome in Alaska. Zelensky called Trump's new stance a big shift, saying the US president could be a game-changer in the conflict.
If he will be sure in Ukraine, and I think that he is more close now to this situation, and that's why, and between us, only Trump can. For today, we know some not too much players in the world who can be game changers, but he is the most closer to this.
Trump also toughened his stance on Moscow, saying NATO nations should shoot down Russian jets that violate their airspace.
Staying with the conflict, President Zelensky has pushed for the international community to act towards ending the war in Ukraine and criticised China's inaction as he addressed the United Nations Security Council on Tuesday.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called for action in ending the war as he addressed the United Nations Security Council gathering on Tuesday.
We must admit the world's attention to the UN is fading. The organization has less influence, and too often there is a lack of real decisions on fundamental issues. This is exactly what we need to speak about today, about the tools that sadly are not working now. But they will work, I'm sure. They will work if you are active, if we are active.
He also pressed for Russia to negotiate for peace and said he had met with U.S. President Donald Trump and discussed a few good ideas to advance peace. He also argued that China has the power to pressure Russia to end the war, but said the country has remained largely inactive. China's deputy ambassador said Beijing has remained impartial, calling for a ceasefire and political talks while pursuing diplomatic and peace efforts. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio underlined that President Trump has devoted significant effort to securing an agreement, but warned his patience is limited.
The president is a very patient man. He's very committed to peace, but his patience is not infinite. And as he has said repeatedly, he has before him the opportunity and the options of imposing additional economic costs on the Russian Federation if necessary in order to bring this to an end.
Russia's deputy ambassador, meanwhile, dismissed the session as little more than a staged platform, insisting it added nothing of value to the peace process, while stating that if others are serious about peace, Moscow is ready to engage. The debate revealed deep divisions, yet a common refrain: the war must end, though how to get there remains starkly contested.
Iran is facing a potential return of UN sanctions, threatening its economy and raising tensions across the Middle East. The move comes over concerns about Tehran's nuclear program and its compliance with international agreements.
Iran is on the brink of facing the return of United Nations sanctions, a move that could further strain its fragile economy and heighten regional tensions. On 28 August 2025, Britain, France and Germany, called the E3, started the process to reimpose sanctions under the 2015 nuclear deal, accusing Iran of not fully cooperating with UN inspectors and expanding its uranium stockpiles. The 30-day period to solve the issue through diplomacy ends at midnight on the 27th of September. The 2015 deal, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, was signed by Britain, Germany, France, the US, Russia and China. It lifted UN, US and EU sanctions in exchange for limits on Iran's nuclear program. The deal also includes a snapback clause, which lets countries reimpose sanctions if Iran is found to be seriously breaking the rules. Once this snapback is triggered, the UN Security Council has 30 days to vote on whether to keep the sanctions relief. The vote needs at least 9 countries in favor and no vetoes from the US, Russia, China, Britain or France. Experts say the vote is likely to fail, which means all UN sanctions would return unless the Council takes other action.
So snapback is one of the last remaining mechanisms of the Iran nuclear agreement, or the JCPOA, that allows any signatory of the agreement to unilaterally snap back the UN sanctions that were imposed on Iran. And the European countries, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, have made a commitment to invoke snapback sanctions, which are meant to expire in October of this year. And they're doing so because they want to preserve this mechanism that they think is an important tool of leverage and pressure as part of the deal. But also, they would like to use this pressure on Iran to return oversight on Iran's nuclear program, as well as return to the negotiating table in order to bring more transparency and accountability on this important international issue.
If snapback happens, previous UN restrictions would come back. These include an arms embargo, bans on uranium enrichment and missile activity, targeted freezes of Iranian assets, travel bans, and the right for countries to inspect Iranian cargo for banned items. France, Britain and Germany have suggested a short extension to allow more time for talks, while Russia and China have proposed a resolution to extend the deal until April 2026, which could prevent the E3 from reimposing sanctions. After the US left the JCPOA in 2018, Iran slowly reduced its compliance with the deal, rapidly increasing uranium enrichment to 60% purity, close to weapons grade. Western countries say civilian nuclear use does not require such high levels, while Iran maintains its program is peaceful. Earlier this year, a 12-day conflict with Israel also complicated monitoring as strikes hit Iranian nuclear sites. Diplomats are still trying to find a solution.
In the context of our consultations and negotiations with them, this issue features quite prominently, of course. I saw the foreign minister yesterday. I will see him again today. Like other, important participants in this process, starting, of course, with E3, I mean, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and, of course, the United States. So I would say there is an intense process of consultations and conversations at the moment, trying to assess whether there is a possibility to find a solution which could prevent that from happening. Of course, there is a dimension which is beyond my own remit, quite clearly, on the political sphere for the countries that decided to launch this process, to decide and see. But of course, we are trying to play a role as guarantors.
The return of UN sanctions shows the ongoing challenge of managing Iran's nuclear program while keeping global security, putting diplomacy and sanctions at the center of a tense geopolitical fight.
China is backing Brazil's $125 billion Tropical Forests Forever Fund, a landmark plan to reward rainforest nations for conservation. The move signals Beijing's shift from climate aid recipient to provider, boosting ties with Brazil ahead of COP30.
China has endorsed Brazil's ambitious $125 billion Tropical Forest Forever facility, a global fund designed to reward rainforest nations for keeping their forests standing. The move signals a shift in climate finance dynamics, with Beijing presenting itself as a provider of climate support rather than a recipient, placing it closer to advanced economies that have traditionally shouldered environmental funding responsibilities. The fund, spearheaded by Brazil ahead of its hosting of COP30 in November later this year, seeks to mobilize sovereign and private contributions to protect tropical forests across the Amazon, Congo, and Southeast Asia. Brazil has pledged $1 billion as seed capital, while China joins a growing list of supporters that includes France, Germany, Norway, the UK, the UAE, and Singapore. Together, this coalition aims to secure permanent financing to safeguard global biodiversity hotspots. Under the proposed mechanism, the fund's capital would be invested to secure financial assets, with annual returns expected to be around $5 billion distributed to rainforest nations that can demonstrate they have preserved their forest cover. Payments would be reduced or cut if deforestation occurs, creating a result-based incentive to prioritize conservation. By endorsing Brazil's initiative, China has not only strengthened its ties with Brasilia, but also it elevates its role in the global south, positioning COP30 as a potential turning point for global climate cooperation. Anna Mahdoum, A News, Beijing.
Now, NASA says its first crewed Artemis mission, a 10-day journey around the moon and back, is on track for launch in April 2026, with the possibility of even moving it forward to February. The space agency will send 4 astronauts on a journey around the moon aboard the Orion capsule, the first such mission in more than 50 years. NASA says the voyage would give people a front row seat to history. The crew members hail from both the United States and Canada. The mission is designed as a key step towards a planned lunar landing in 2027. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. To Central Asia, and Kazakhstan has finalized $5.2 billion worth of investment deals with the United States during President Tokayev's visit to New York, marking a major boost to the country's economic ties with Washington. 11 agreements and memorandums were signed between Kazakh and American companies, ranging across transport, logistics, energy, and IT. The deals follow Tokayev's earlier trip to China, where he secured $15 billion across 70 agreements.
Making certainly the opportunity
Staying with Central Asia, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, President Shavkat Mirziyoyev held high-level meetings with world leaders, signed important agreements with the United States, and advanced Uzbekistan's cooperation with international organizations, including the World Trade Organization and the United Nations. Our correspondent, Sevil Rajapova, has more.
At the 80th UN General Assembly in New York, President Shavkat Mirziyoyev focused on strengthening Uzbekistan's global partnerships through active diplomacy. During his meeting with US President Donald Trump, the sides outlined priority areas for deepening the strategic partnership, including regional issues and cooperation in aviation, mining, finance, innovation, and energy. A roundtable with American companies also produced 10 agreements in these sectors, with Boeing, Citigroup, FL Smith, and Cargill among the signatories. President Mirziyoyev also held meetings with South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung, Albanian President Pervez Bigai, King Abdullah II of Jordan, and Czech President Petr Pavel to expand bilateral ties. The talks focused on strengthening strategic partnerships, expanding trade and investment, enhancing technology and industry, developing political and cultural ties, accelerating joint projects and cooperation in innovation, agriculture, and transport. At the multilateral level, President held talks with WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who confirmed that Uzbekistan has completed bilateral negotiations on accession. She noted that the country is expected to become a full WTO member by March 2026. In a meeting with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, President Mirziyoyev reviewed cooperation within the framework of Uzbekistan's Sustainable Development Goals. The side agreed to prepare a new 5-year cooperation program and to strengthen Uzbekistan's role within UN institutions. They also discussed preparing for the upcoming 43rd UNESCO General Conference in Samarkand, which will further highlight Uzbekistan's growing role as a global platform for dialogue and multilateral cooperation. Through these meetings and agreements, Uzbekistan demonstrated its commitment to multilateralism, regional stability, and international cooperation, while reinforcing its position as an active and reliable global partner. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Afghanistan is calling on Japan to restart a suspended $34 million water project first launched back in 2020. The project is seen as vital for addressing the country's growing water needs. For more on this, we go to our correspondent in Kabul, Tamim Bahis.
Across Kabul, families are increasingly reliant on mobile water tankers as underground reserves dry up. Experts warn this short-term fix may worsen the problem as over-extraction continues to drain aquifers faster than they can recover. The Ministry of Energy and Water has registered more than 200 supply companies, urging them to draw water from rivers or outside the city instead of local wells. Officials say restrictions are also in place for high consumption industries such as factories and car washes. Meanwhile, Afghan leaders are appealing to Japan to resume a suspended water project worth $24 million first launched in 2020, saying the city urgently needs that infrastructure to secure future supplies. Yet the scale of the crisis is staggering. International agencies report that nearly 1/3 of Afghans lack access to safe drinking water, with studies showing up to 80% of Kabul's groundwater is unsafe. A new report warns the capital could become the first modern city to run dry within 5 years. With aquifers nearing collapse, experts stress the need for immediate investment, stronger regulation, and international support before time runs out. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for A News.
Turkey and the United Nations World Food Programme are stepping up their cooperation to address global food insecurity. Talks were held on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met with World Food Programme Executive Director Cindy McCain to discuss Turkey's key role in the organisation's global work, thanks to its strategic location and advanced logistical infrastructure. Both sides also discussed plans to position Turkey as a strategic stockpile and logistics hub for World Food Programme operations worldwide. Officials noted that this shared commitment marks another milestone in advancing Turkey's cooperation with the UN system. Now, the Secretary-General of the African Continental Free Trade Area has visited Azerbaijan for high-level talks. His visit focused on exploring partnerships to make public services more accessible to citizens, using technology and expanding cooperation between Africa and the South Caucasus. In an exclusive interview to A News, he touched upon the spheres for future cooperation.
And on this occasion, we met with Hassan to discuss an arrangement of collaboration on the digital economy and digitization, particularly digitization of government services. As you know, Hassan has a very, very successful and effective digitalization strategy, which many countries around the world are looking at very, very closely with a view to modeling it for their own improvement and efficiency of government services. So we had a very good discussion there, and we also had discussions that focused on trade and investment relations between Azerbaijan and the African continent. I hope that an outcome of this meeting will be a collaboration arrangement on the digital economy, on digitization, between the AFCFTA Secretariat and Hassan under the President's authority.
The Eurasian University Summit has commenced in Baku. This year's event is held under the theme Transnational Research from Knowledge to Global Impact. Our correspondent Nurai Mustafa reports on the details of the summit.
Hello, we are reporting from Baku at the Eurasian University Summit. This year's event, taking place on 24-25 September, is themed Transnational Research from Knowledge to Global Impact. The summit brings together over 300 participants, more than 150 institutions, and over 50 international and local speakers from more than 20 countries. Discussions are taking place across several key areas. The impact of global research, leveraging the strengths of the Eurasian region.
I think transnational education is really booming now. There's a sense actually that the traditional student flows for international study are being disrupted. You know, not always students want to go to the West. There's new emerging hubs of excellence in transnational education here in Central Asia, in the Caucasus. There's a real extraordinary boom of interest in studying here on branch campuses or with dual and joint degrees. So the in-person experience, I think, is going through a renaissance. There's a real surge of new destinations for transnational education, for branch campuses, for international collaboration.
So universities, actually, expectations are changing in our modern world. They need to produce more research outputs, more innovations to develop the country's economic and the social economic situation, expectations. So here, based on that, actually we are going to invest more on research, collaborate with the industrial organizations to align our content of the education for the labor market requirements. So I think the main goal is to establish this, bridge between the universities and the industries, and to solve any experimental research issues for them.
The role of higher education in achieving sustainable development goals, connecting continents, opportunities for collaboration and innovation. Participants are actively engaging in seminars and panel discussions, creating significant opportunities both scientifically and for international cooperation.
I think that means we have to perhaps change the way we assess, change the way we learn, put more focus on group learning, problem solving, less focus on traditional exams and traditional essays. But it's a really good opportunity because it actually allows us to rethink why we assess students, how we assess students, and how they learn. And on the positive side, we teach them to be AI literate for the future, but we also ensure that they maximize the educational opportunity through personalization, through the ability to scale quality. So it's a very delicate balancing act, but I think we have to embrace it. But we have to make sure that the teachers and the universities lead the development of EdTech and not the other way around. We don't need to follow EdTech, we need to really turn learning into an EdTech facilitated experience.
This is Nuray Mustafa reporting with our cameraman Khalid Aliyev for A News.
Baku is welcoming the world's brightest junior skaters as Azerbaijan hosts an ISU Grand Prix event for the very first time. Covering the competition at the Heydar Aliyev Sports Complex, our correspondent Nartichek Jahangali reports.
We're coming to you from Baku, where the 2025 ISU Junior Grand Prix of figure skating has officially kicked off. And for the very first time, Azerbaijan is hosting a stage of this prestigious international series. The temperature inside the venue is noticeably cooler than the outside, but the atmosphere at the Heydar Aliyev Sports Complex is absolutely electric. 92 athletes from 38 countries are taking to the ice, including 17 pairs. All are between the ages of 13 and 19, and many are seen as future Olympians. Right now behind me, junior skaters are competing in the men's singles event. Over the next few days, we'll witness the world's most promising young skaters compete across singles, pairs and ice dance, all fighting for valuable points towards the Junior Grand Prix final in December, the pinnacle of the junior season. Among the strongest contenders, we're watching standout entries from Japan, the United States, South Korea and Canada. Azerbaijan is represented in the singles category by Sabina Aliyeva, Lilia Khundova and Arina Kalugina. In ice dance, Anna O'Brien and Drake Tong will carry the flag. A total of 300 participants, including coaches, judges, technical specialists and officials have arrived in Baku, making this not only a major sporting event, but a milestone moment for figure skating in the region. Stay with us for full coverage, interviews and behind-the-scene moments. I'm Nartichek Jahangirli, here with Khalid Aliyev, A News.
Welcome back to A News. Now, let's delve deeper into the UN General Assembly. Azerbaijan extended its engagement with Africa through high-level diplomatic meetings and ongoing initiatives focusing on climate diplomacy, economic cooperation and development. To tell us more, we are joined by Abdinur Toumi, a political analyst specialising in Africa. Thank you for being with us. Now, firstly, let's rewind slightly, as these meetings in New York come after the official visit of Rwandan President Paul Kagame to Azerbaijan. Could you remind us about what took place during this visit?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me on the program. Actually, in fact, I mean, this visit, it comes in a crucial time for international affairs. Now, in that, in a time of world order and security and stability. And here we see another non-conventional regional actor actually bridging relations between South Caucasus and Africa. And this is, it gives to Baku again, to position itself for geoeconomics and geopolitics influence in Africa. And one has noticed that happened over the past decade or so. And I mean, we saw also there is a genuine cooperation from Baku to play a major role in Africa, and now has become, since 2022, I mean, Azerbaijan has an official permanent representation at the African Union, in which a strong message that about its engagement and cooperation in the African continent.
Now, could you talk us through the meetings that have been taking place in New York between President Aliyev and African countries, and what have they achieved?
Actually, those meetings are, of course, I mean, they come in bilateral level in these world leaders gathering. And sure, I mean, there are many, and as I stated, since we are in these in time of world affairs and uncertainty, so there are countries or leaders of countries who are positioning themselves in the aftermath of a new world order. Actually, I'm just trying to paraphrase a quote from Gramsci. I mean, we know that this world order is ending, but we don't know when a new world order will start. And these, actually, for instance, as I said, a non-traditional regional actor playing a role in Africa, meaning by that, Azerbaijan is not a conventional actor or traditional actor playing in Africa now in that because of its, far distance from the continent, and then meaning by that, like the role of the, what they call the conventional superpowers, like for instance, original powers like France and the UK, and Germans and the Dutch, how roles in Africa. Now there is a new parameter in terms of these relations between Africa and Central Asian countries, and we saw, so there is like, meaning by that, there is another country who is playing a major role in Africa and has a traditional and a solid base in Africa and relations with African is Turkey, for instance, and we see how these days the axis between, a solid axis between Baku and Ankara is very, very strong, in which we had for the development and the cooperation for the Azerbaijan to position itself as an influential country dealing with the African countries.
Now, our viewers were seeing pictures just earlier of that meeting which took place between Azerbaijan and Kenya. How significant of a player is Kenya in Azerbaijan's African policy?
For Kenya, for instance, this follows with the relations between Baku that has stated with the Horn African countries, like for instance, Ethiopia and Somalia and even Djibouti, and Kenya now is playing an Eastern African country who is playing a major role in the African continent, and with its like mediation initiative and so on. And this helps the two countries to bridge together. And now in that, there is on bilateral level in terms of agriculture and technology and energy.
And now, to what extent is that building on the legacy from COP29? You mentioned there agriculture, energy.
It is actually, a way by other means of this cooperation, and not, the COP20. There is the Baku Forum, in which is pretty much now a challenge to, in a good way, to the Doha challenge on that hemisphere, on the South Caucasian hemisphere, and relations between Central Asia and Africa, for instance. And now in that, the position of Azerbaijan as a pivotal state on its geopolitical landscape and a strong energy supplier to Europe. And we saw how it's playing this role in light of the crisis, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and how Azerbaijan is playing all actually filling this vacuum for the Europeans. And this is why now the Africans are looking to Azerbaijan as a credible partner and also a serious one in terms of energy cooperation, agricultural cooperation, technology cooperation, and also on humanitarian aid also, and how the Azerbaijan is playing that role, like for instance, same like Turkey, and in which brings to a new parameter to that soft power, and in which a solid paradigm for the Baku's Africa's policy.
Another aspect to this that I'd like to pick up on is how Azerbaijan is exporting its e-governance model to several African countries. Could you talk us through that a bit more?
For that, and for instance, especially we are in digital world, and Africans the continent is moving, and there is this mobility, and there is kind of a huge hunger and curiosity for technology, and the youth who are also looking at these tools as a way of development and progress, and also taking themselves away from the classic relations that they have their elders with European, like classic conventional European countries like France and the UK, for instance. So they look at Azerbaijan as a model, and there is this trust actually because of these, which is very important in international relations. I mean, to have to build up the trust factor not only between the leaders, but also between the elite and the people in particular. And so the youth, for instance, and when we do startups and so on, are looking at this as a model to develop their, their own business on one hand, and also to lift their countries together.
Now, you mentioned that trust and Azerbaijan's presence in not only Africa, but the global south, that's been increasing over the past year, hasn't it?
It is, in fact, and particularly in his role playing in the non-alignment sphere, in which today is, like you stated, is the global south sphere, in which it is a serious now challenge for the global north, and particularly to the US hegemony, not only in Africa, but in South America, for instance, in the Caucasian area and so on. Even though, there are, of course, Baku has this balance of foreign policy with superpowers and regional powers, and this pragmatic foreign policy, in which leads to achieve its geoeconomics and geopolitics and position itself in this and again unstable world order.
And Azerbaijan launched the Global South NGO platform in April this year. Do you think these meetings in New York is going to bolster that?
Actually, it does, and there are other meetings as well too, because as you know, we are in this uncertainty and instability, and particularly, in light of the ongoing carnage that is taking place and genocide that is taking place in Gaza, and we saw how all the world leaders' speech at the UN General Assembly podium was the main part of discourse was about Gaza, and this is why the message it's of course calling to end this genocide and this carnage, and also to look to reform the world order, and this world order is represented now by the UN. So, and this brings us to that relation between North and South now is no longer a myth. It is a serious challenge for the northern countries and for the global North countries. And this is why we saw these leaders, Western leaders, particularly European leaders, who are now distancing themselves from the US hegemony, whether on the Gaza dossier or on Ukrainian-Russia dossier, and even on the economic and trade dossier as well.
Really interesting to get your insights there. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme.
Thank you.
Well, that brings you up to date with world news for the hour. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned to A News.